People intrinsically want to focus on the sexy part, right? Like it's closing the month, closing the quarter, hitting your revenue goals. And that's consistently something that is a focus for the business. And what doesn't get talked about enough and has a real world impact is
Today I got Sam Brown joining me. He's led CS at Deel and DataSnipper and pretty much seen it at different stages. We talk about how customer success becomes the scapegoat for deeper go-to-market problems and what founders consistently miss.
people are almost incentivized to not improve the customer experience.
One thing that you think investors most misunderstand about what's happening on the ground?
People intrinsically want to focus on the sexy part, right? Like it's closing the month, closing the quarter, hitting your revenue goals. And that's consistently something that is a focus for the business. And what doesn't get talked about enough and has a real world impact is how are the operations working? Right? How are we investing in internal tooling? How are we investing in internal optimization to make people's lives actually better? And it's something that every business I've worked for struggles with. I think Deel did a really good job of it, right? Figuring out the operationalization of stuff, but even so, it was still very revenue focused. So I can give you a key example. I'm not going to tell you the company, but there was something that the team had to do to basically get the customers to use the latest version of the features. And that was a manual process that basically my team had to do. And they had to do it twice a year. And we had over 2,000 customers. So that's 4,000 instances of doing this action. And we asked many times, hey, can we just build a self-service way of doing this? And it always got put on the roadmap and it always got deprioritized. And honestly, that was thousands of hours of work just down the toilet on things that weren't really a value add. It was actually a terrible customer experience. It was also not enjoyable for my team. And they could have been spending time on other things. So that's just an example. And that has a real impact on scaling long term. And to make it really concrete, I've also been in like meetings with like VP engineering or like VP product and said like, hey, I'm willing to give up like 2 headcount if you can hire 1 extra engineer and that engineer can work full-time on internal systems. Because I know I'll get that back on scalability, right?
We can talk about all the good stuff, but it's also good to talk about tactical examples from all different roles and parts of your career.
A couple of things that are really top of mind for me. Number one is for the last 15 years, these have said like customers are our growth engine, but so many customer success teams suck at it. Like they really suck. Part of it is that they're not given the right mandate, but also part of it is that leaders don't take ownership, right? So everything is very short-term focused most of the time. So it's next quarter, next month. That's the extent that most businesses are thinking, which is fine because you're trying to hit your numbers. But it doesn't instill customer growth. To grow a customer, it takes time, it takes trust, it takes effort, it takes value. And often those things aren't aligned. And then the second thing is, CS leaders are not willing to take ownership for renewals, for expansion. A lot of CS leaders are focused on all the things that are happening to them, not all the things that they have control over, right? Rather than looking for solutions, they're looking for the problems and they're looking to complain about the problems. And that also feeds into thinking that customer success should be a place where it's very clearly defined without any scope creep. And that's just not the reality of working at a startup. And ideally, why you work there is because you get to do things that are outside of your job description. If you really want to have a very narrow job description and only do those things, I can recommend go work in a bank. I have a very strong opinion about this. I really think that the business should be split into two different teams or 3, depending on your go-to-market motion. You should have a new business team. You should have an existing business team, and therefore account management should report into CS. And then you should have a channels team, and that channels team should own all channel partnerships as well as expansion retention on those channels. So many teams just don't have the foundations in place, right? They're all running in 100 different directions. Nobody actually sits down and defines what are the processes, what are the things that we want to know and be able to measure and actually make a plan on how to do that, right? The best teams I've worked with are the ones that know what they want to track and how they want to track it and hold people accountable. It works for a couple of reasons. Number one, people don't get burnout if they know what they need to deliver. Secondarily, you can't really make decisions if you don't have good data. You can, but then they gut feel, and that's a challenge. And then lastly, like it takes any ownership for it. They're just looking for a RevOps team to join and fix everything. Magic
Classic.
RevOps team that will fix everything.
Do you think that CS is typically looked at as a firefighting function? What is
It's a
your take?
mix, but I think when you go into working at a startup, there's certain expectations that you may have, and often the reality doesn't align with those expectations, and that's also why I try to be very transparent in interview processes about what is going wrong, what isn't working, as well as what is fun. Because
Yeah.
ultimately, you want people to come in with their eyes open. One is a positioning problem, like calling a role customer success already sets it up for failure in a lot of ways.
What would you call it?
I would just call it account management. That's what it really is, right?
Yeah.
But like ultimately, a problem is if you have to explain it to somebody, then it's already badly titled. Customer success is the mindset of a business. It's really a holistic thing. I think that that's already a challenge because for customers to be successful, it is really an end-to-end company-wide initiative. You need to know who you're selling to, why you're selling to them, do good qualification, sell the right customers for the right problem. Also, you need to market in the right way. And you get down into the actual delivery and onboarding and implementation, right? You can't be like bait and switch where we're promising you something, but actually it doesn't deliver on that. And then for the continuous value to happen, you need to solve multiple problems. So there's all these micro things that need to happen.
It's also about like explaining the value because I've seen a lot of cases where as like you're big account managing, but when it comes to the renewal terms or pricing, like a lot of the frontline operators, like they struggle to be able to articulate very clearly why the product or the software is priced the way it is.
A lot of CSMs are never trained about the challenger sales mindset. To drive value, you need to challenge the status quo. If everything continues to go the same, they're not going to get value from your product probably. So things need to change. So you need to challenge them on that. The second thing is post-sales teams are also not enabled to have those ROI conversations. And what I mean by enabled, it's both on the personal level, like how do you explain value to people and help them understand that value, but it's also on the data side. What organizations are very good at are building dashboards that have 1,000 metrics on them. But for it to be impactful, you need to boil it down to something that is very tangible and that you can explain in a simple, straightforward way to somebody else. That value conversation plus that value metric needs to be something that somebody can sit at the lunchroom table and explain to somebody in 2 minutes and they get
especially
it right.
if you're selling upward to the C-suite,
exactly.
right?
Because you're not always going to be talking to the right person potentially. So at DataSnipper, we like boiled it down to just like one ROI number, which was you get X return on investment, and this is how we calculate it. Boom, 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 done. Right. So then it's really tangible for people, right? This is also the challenge in like the on the data side, people want things to be perfect, and there's never anything that's perfect. You have to do like you have to make do with what you have. And I would really encourage people to think about how can I build an MVP of like a ROI calculation, test it with customers, see if you get pushback. If you get pushback, challenge those customers to give you real world numbers, and they will often, and then bake that back into your ROI calculations, do that iteration a couple times, and then you'll get to a number where like 95% of your customer base will just accept it, right?
Most of the time, I don't want to generalize, but I'd say a lot of the cases are either tied to revenue or cost efficiency.
If you sit with a CFO, they're like, how is this going to make us money, save us money, or mitigate risk? Those are the things they care about. And they're the budget holder. They're the one that will decide whether you get your 10 or 15K that you need for something.
Like 5 years ago, when companies were pushing this PLG motion, post sales or the user experience was an afterthought. And now you start to see, because the building costs have gone so low, a lot of companies are suffering, right? I think an example, one of the contact providers, enterprise accounts, was like, hey, we're building a new sales team. We need 15 seats. This should be super clear. You're already on this plan. Here's how we upsell you. And this is what you're going to get. It took them weeks just to get a price on this. That's just a clear example of defining the customer journey very poorly.
Probably what happened, and I'm assuming here, is that like internally they have a process that says like, hey, the customer wants 5 seats. Like A CSM has to do some discovery. They need to create a CSQL. The CSQL has to be qualified, right? A meeting needs to be booked. The AE or AM then needs to basically qualify the lead, and there'll be like 25 steps, right? And that's why it will take weeks for this to happen. So at businesses I've worked for, I'm a big fan of having a commercial responsibility matrix, which is really defined based on the customer journey, right? So we normally split it as complexity of sale. If you have something like this, which is a seat upsell, I would always say just let a CSM do it, because the customer understands the product, they understand the value they're getting, they understand their pricing. If anything, they'll get a volume-based discount, and they don't need to talk to anyone else. However, if, as an example, you are selling a new product line, that's more similar to a new business sale. So in that case, pre-qualify,
You do some
and
discovery.
there's like a bigger process involved. So I think often people think about it in terms of like internal ownership, internal processes, but actually it should be, what's the customer's experience? How do we make it as low friction as possible? And ultimately, I would actually even want to get to a point where you just have it in your product. Let them just buy it themselves, right? That's also another challenge in customer success. People are almost incentivized to not improve the customer experience. A lot of customer success teams are compensated based on input data, like have you had a call? Have you done that? Have you done X, Y, Z? Instead of output. The way I have always thought about working with customers, even at the beginning of my career, I worked in a bank, right? And I used to sit next to somebody, and she used to be so proud that her customers would call her for everything. She was their bottleneck. She took pride in that. And I see this also with customer success. They take pride in the fact that the customer needs me. But to me, a customer needing you is a failure in your product or in your service. They need you because something doesn't work or they can't do it themselves. And ideally, you should be enabling them to do it themselves. At Deel, as an example, we really focused on like what are the friction points and opportunity points where people should be involved. And let's trigger those and let people add value through solving a problem, or add value through uncovering more opportunity for them to get value from our products, rather than focus on you need to have a meeting with your customer every month. Because maybe there's a lot of customers who don't need your help.
Take me to day one of one of your startup roles.
I worked for a company called Workiva, actually. I joined as like a very early employee in Europe. So like I think I was like under the 5th like employee, and I did a bit of everything: office management, support, customer success management. It was interesting because customer success was a very new thing. I didn't even know what it was. I applied for this role just because it looked interesting and kind of fell into customer success in that way. And the part I really like that really hooked me on customer success as a career was the cross-functional like collaboration and working with other teams. And I think it's the closest role you'll have to like an end-to-end view of a business without being like the CEO, because you really have your fingers in a lot of pies, and over time you can like reduce that. It brings a lot of joy to me, and seeing like that something is going wrong and then like that you solve that for somebody like gives you a very good feeling. It's definitely a bit of a drug in that way.
What about like your first startup role?
I would say my first true startup would be Optimizely. I was one of the first CS hires in Europe. Customer success was relatively new to the organization as a whole. We were just over 10 million ARR. Europe represented a pretty sizable amount. It was like 30 or 40% of revenue. The day I started, I got given an Excel sheet of customers, and they were like, good luck, figure it out. And then we built out Salesforce to like work well, and then like we added Gainsight on top. And over that time, I went from like being an individual contributor to being like a team lead to being a manager, and then managing like quite a lot of like the European book of business. And yeah, that was my first experience of like being a hiring manager at Workiva. I did a bit, but it was way later stage, so you were just told what to do. So it was a lot of fun. I still reminisce about those days. Working there was the best decision of my entire career, because I worked with people who were the smartest people I ever met, who were the hardest working people I ever met, and every day I went to work, I felt like an idiot. And I think like that is where you grow the most. I had days that I almost broke down and cried, and I had days that were like the highest of highs, right? It was also relatively early in like CS life cycle as well as a role. So we just had no idea what we were doing.
What was like one of the first mistakes you made? Something that you tried that didn't work?
Trying to like automate onboarding a lot. We ended up in the situation where like a lot of our time was spent on onboarding customers and like getting it all set up. And I was given like the project of like, hey, can you figure out like how to make this more streamlined? And I was like, cool, I'm gonna just set up this process and it'll be great. And I spent like 2 weeks doing it and then tried to release it and it didn't work at all. And there was multiple reasons for that. Like part of it was that I tried to build a process into the CRM straight away. Secondarily, I kind of did it in a bubble by myself. And I also had all of my own personal onboardings to go by. My manager at the time said to me, start with a spreadsheet, put it all in a spreadsheet, start to collect the information, start to look at like what is working and what's not, like, and then work backwards from there. And then like the last step, like maybe in like 3 or 6 months, is to build a process in the CRM. Don't do that from day one, right? And that was a really good learning. Don't over-engineer things to begin with, because like number one, change management is really hard. Changing the way people work, and people have enough shit on their plate without having to learn new things all the time. So doing incremental steps helps a lot. Secondarily, don't just go off your gut all the time. So I made a lot of mistakes because of that. And then the last thing is I looked for information that validated my own assumptions rather than being like, okay, like what is really going on here? And
what tools are you using day to day? You talked about gain sites briefly.
AI has helped with a lot of things in terms of just making like integrating stuff and getting insights and things is easier than ever. I do worry about like the true long-term value of AI as it's hyped today, right? Like I think there's a lot of like micro things that it can help with. But like when I look at like tooling, I still see, at least in the foreseeable future, like a need for a strong data governance process, right? Because AI is not going to be able to solve that. And AI built on top of shitty data gives shitty insights. As much as you want to try and train it not to, it just will. And so my approach generally is like trying to figure out, okay, what are the things that, like, what are the processes that I want to do, right? As like within my, what are the things that need, what are the jobs to be done? And then where should those things live? Should they live in a CRM? Should they live in another system?
Do you have like a framework to map this out, or is there like some sort of like playbook that you've created that generally maps this out?
I mean, I have a like overview of like all the processes that I think a customer success team should like be involved in. And then I try to map like what is the current products that we use for those things. So like how many products do we have, like where do they live? And then is there native integrations between different product suites, right? Like so as an example, like very simple, straightforward ticketing and CRM, right? Like Zendesk, like Intercom, all of these have like native integrations, right? So that's pretty easy. And then I start to think about, okay, like a lot of companies are also like taking production data and they're plugging it directly into like CRMs and things like that. So directly from your like production data set. But actually you kind of need something in between, like some kind of layer, whether it's Snowflake, whether it's something not as expensive and more straightforward, but some kind of data warehouse where you can basically take all of the data that you have about your customers and aggregate it into one place. And then ideally I want to do like segmentation in that place as well, right? So segment specific layers of customers. And then I want to send it to whatever tools enable my team to do their job. Ultimately, you want people to not also switch products too often, right? So you don't want to have 20 products and you don't want to have no integration between them, which I see in a lot of companies where that I've worked for. So normally I standardize in the CRM as much as possible because that's where most of the other data lives. I would love it if there was some AI native CRMs that are robust enough.
ADIO is the one that most people are talking about.
Yeah, exactly. But I do wonder around how strong the data governance and stuff really is on these things. I haven't tried it, to be honest. I should try. Then I just think about like, how do we deliver like content to customers, like in a scalable way?
Using any specific tools for that?
We use like Intercom at a previous company to do in-product messaging. They have a good option for that. You also have like product walkthrough tools. I've seen an AI product onboarding tool which had context based on what exact widget you were in the product and could basically give you tips on like what you should fill in and how you should use it. There's no shortage of tools. I think the problem is most people don't go to the basics. Is your data foundation strong? What data do we need? What do we have? And how trustworthy is it? So many CSMs say to me, this one thing's wrong. And I'm like, yeah, guys, it's never going to be perfect.
Fire on a couple of things that start with like dashboards, data points. Either you just don't have enough insight or you don't have enough clarity. What do you feel AI is going to be able to optimize for in the medium to long term?
I find too much AI is very context unaware. If you can solve that problem of like the context unawareness of products, I think you can get value from that. I think the challenge is like repeatability and consistency. Where AI can help is it can help shortcut the research period, right? It's going from I have an idea about what's going on to researching it to validating it or invalidating it.
Yeah.
One-time analysis, this becomes almost just a no-brainer that you can do so easily. What I don't think AI is really good at today is how do you build consistent dashboards that people need to use every day that help them do their job? And that's a gap today. The other thing is most companies where they actually struggle on the data and dashboarding side is having this whole like from company strategy, department strategy, team strategy, individual execution. And that part is often missing, and people use OKR frameworks, obviously. But I think a lot of the time, people don't think enough about how do we tie people's day-to-day work to the company's overall goals, right? And how do we make it really easy for people to understand? What are the 3 goals the company has? And then, okay, what does that actually mean for the onboarding team and the CSM team, and then give them the goals. And then what does that mean for you as a person? What should you be doing every day to contribute to your team goal, which then contributes to the department goal, which then helps the business grow?
Was there a classic priorities clashing, specifically with sales or the product team?
So when I worked at Folian, we went through a stage where we had to do replatforming of the entire product. It was the classic thing of product and engineering giving a timeline, everybody else agreeing to that timeline and committing their revenue commits based on that timeline, and that timeline not being realistic. And that wasn't really on the product and engineering team, to be honest. In hindsight, we put so much pressure on them that they just felt they had to commit to something, right? And they just didn't know, like there was so many unknowns that it was going to be impossible for them to ever give a realistic timeline, right? So they gave a timeline. We all committed, like I was VP sales success then, so like I was also doing pre-sales, and we committed to revenue numbers, right? And then it was supposed to take 6 months, and then it took 12 months, and then it took longer. And yeah, it was super tough because I had committed to certain things to the board and we weren't going to change the numbers. So we had to figure it out and make it work. And I had a lot of tough conversations with the head of product about it. And I was maybe a little bit too much about it. And I learned from that. But I think this is classic, like management team not sitting down and empathizing with each other. And then pressure comes on. People get stressed, relationships for I still have a good relationship with the head of product, but it really was one of the catalysts for me leaving Folian. I got to the point where I'm so frustrated about everything that I was like, if I stay, I'm going to be that asshole that everyone's like, yeah, I hated working with him. So decided that it was a good point to move on, and it was better for the business, but also better for me.
If you talk about startups and founder-led in particular, it's always a case of like how quickly these people can iterate, and they have to be the ones that are going upstream to the board and giving themselves a little bit of a buffer, but also going downstream to the team and saying, listen, if this timeline isn't realistic, then I need some level of benchmark on what is. I want to talk about your last post because obviously 400 interviews in 1 year is manic.
Yeah.
I've seen the head of talent posts at Deel. Obviously, you guys get a shit ton of inbound. It's a brand that everyone knows now. And I really liked your take. It was a strong one around Deel, stop selling the role and actually trying to sell away from it to see how candidates react. It's how we frame the conversation with our clients. Classic example being when we hire founding AEs and the question comes, hey, like, it's the OTE model or what's the comp plan? And the answer is, I haven't thought about it. It's a good way to pressure test and see how people think. I want to understand, how are you testing for these things?
Number one, how did we do so many interviews? We had a pretty rigorous process. So the TA team at Deel is very strong. We had a lot of inbound, obviously. We also worked with some agencies in the beginning, and then we built our own outbound motion for talent. So we did everything super quick. We didn't have interviews that were more than half an hour. We also embedded call recording. There's like now things like HireFlix, which do this automatically. But back then, right, there wasn't really that much option. So we, like our TA and engineering team, just like built a loop. You would send them like a prompt, like they would record it. It would then get dropped in a Slack channel. And then it would be a 10-minute recording. Everybody would watch it on double speed. And then within 24 hours, you had to like give thumbs up, thumbs down on it. And that was the way of screening super quickly, right? Then the other thing that's really important is making people feel at ease. I want people to perform at their best in interviews. And I have a very structured way that I do interviews, and I do it in the same way every time. And got to the point now that my wife is like, you're interviewing again.
I know when you're interviewing.
I always introduce myself. I always tell them like about me, about mistakes I've made in my career. I tell them a little bit about me personally as well. And then I ask them a few questions. I normally ask, why did you change jobs? Like, what was the decision-making criteria? How do they think about changing roles? Is it that they're running away from something or running towards something?
Did you never go off script, by the way?
The best interviews go off script, right? Like the person digs in, and those are the best where it becomes just a conversation. And I always leave between 10 and 15 minutes at the end to let them ask me questions. Questions that they ask are way more telling than almost any question I would ever ask them. It tells me, are they company first, team second, me last, or are they me first? Right? If they want to know what the challenging parts are, how they think about the metrics and KPIs, a lot of people don't even ask that, right? The one question that I really like asking is, give me 3 things that you love about your job, that you get out of bed every day because of, and give me 3 things that if you never had to do in your job again, you would be happy.
That's a good one.
Number one, it tells you they aligned with the role. The second thing is, so many people try to not give you an answer on the things they don't like. And that tells you they're not able to be self-reflective on the things they don't like.
Good to meet you, man. Take care. Yeah, we'll talk soon.
Bye.